In the near future, mysterious creatures appear out of nowhere and begin killing humanity, sparking an apocalyptic event that leaves few survivors. Theories abound about the cause: a bug carrying an infection, a purple haze, a punishment for humanity, but they're all rumors and no one knows the real story. In a small town, Paul is searching for supplies when the sirens suddenly start wailing. He immediately runs out, navigating the streets, hiding when necessary and steering clear of screams and explosions. As black smoke envelopes the city, Paul makes it to an abandoned house on the outskirts where he reunites with his children, whom he must now care for alone. 15 years later, Paul's boys have grown into healthy teenagers. They still live in the same house, venturing out during the day to search for supplies, but staying hidden at night. As soon as the sun begins to set, Joseph covers the windows and tells their dog Rocco to come inside. Paul waits outside until he sees Thomas return and scolds him for being late. Thomas explains that he enjoys helping their neighbors, the Rose family, who run a farm. The three then ensure every door and window is locked before sitting down to dinner. Paul scolds Thomas once more, warning that if he's ever late again, he won't be allowed to leave the boundaries. Joseph teases his brother, and their argument quickly escalates into a physical fight, which Paul stops, reminding them they're men, not animals. After dinner, Paul watches his sons play chess, but gets distracted when Rocco starts scratching and growling at the floor. Taking it as a bad omen, Paul and Thomas head downstairs and are startled by a sudden banging on the door. It seems the creatures are trying to get in, so they brace the door to stop them from forcing it open. The pounding and shaking lasts several seconds before the creatures give up and leave. Thomas then calls out Joseph for not helping, but Joseph reveals he was listening to understand their behavior. He observed 3 attempts, the first lasting 10 seconds, the second 20, and the last only 1. Joseph believes the first was a test, the second a serious attempt to break through, and the third a frustrated hit. The next day they check the door and see it's covered in claw marks and has weakened. Paul and his boys set out to gather wood to reinforce it. They bring their findings back to the house, and while Thomas chops the wood, Paul checks on Joseph, who is busy in the barn. With some prodding, Joseph admits he's trying to build a vehicle because he's tired of feeling confined and afraid. Impressed, Paul takes a look and quickly makes adjustments that get the car running. Thrilled, Paul takes the teens on a drive to teach them how to operate the vehicle. They return after an hour of wandering, and Paul announces the windows also need reinforcement. He sends the boys to the river to salvage materials, disappointing Thomas, who had been promised he could visit the farm. Paul insists this is more important. The brothers head to the river in the car, and Thomas starts blaming Joseph, saying Paul sent him along only to protect his brother. Joseph retorts that he doesn't need protecting, prompting Thomas to get out of the car when they pass by the farm. He asks Joseph to pick him up on the way back. Meanwhile, in the house, Paul finishes reinforcing the door and takes a break by the waterfall, where he notices a dark, eerie hole in the rocks. Meanwhile, Joseph reaches the river, ties himself to the car, and descends into an old abandoned ship to look for supplies. Inside a locker, he finds a pin-up from a magazine, which leaves him speechless for a moment. He searches further, but is startled when a swarm of bugs bursts out from a pile of trash. The bugs try to reach his skin, forcing him to make a quick escape. At the farm, Thomas helps the family with chores, though it becomes clear his main motivation for going there is the owner's daughter, Charlotte. The teens have a mutual crush, and they take a walk through the fields together. Charlotte shows him a rope tied to a tree, explaining that when she was little she was only allowed to play outside if she was touching the tree. She would tie herself to it to give herself more room to play while technically remaining attached to the tree. They play a game, sharing wild theories about the cause of the apocalypse. When it's time for Thomas to leave, Charlotte gives him a tight hug. With the sun beginning to set, both boys must hurry back. Paul returns home and grows worried when he finds Rocco, but neither of his sons. Joseph, trying to start the car, finally gets it moving after several attempts. Meanwhile, Thomas, running as fast as he can, slips and falls into a crevice. When Joseph arrives to pick him up, he doesn't see Thomas and just drives home. Once he returns, he explains the situation to Paul, who tells him to get inside and lock everything up. Paul, accompanied by Rocco, then heads out to search for Thomas. In the crevice, Thomas wakes up sore and disoriented. Using a lighter, he surveys his surroundings and is horrified to see a creature reaching through a hole in the wall. The creature screeches, a sound that Paul and Rocco hear nearby. Moving cautiously, Thomas takes out a small knife and stabs the creature's hand, causing it to retreat. However, as he steps back, another creature appears above him and grabs his face. Thomas struggles to breathe, but before he passes out, Paul arrives and pulls the creature off, quickly killing it. After confirming that Thomas is unharmed, Paul and Rocco find a tunnel that leads into the crevice. Since it's too dangerous to run through the forest at night, they decide to stay in the crevice until sunrise, blocking the entrance for safety. As they settle in, they hear creatures moving through the hole, so they prepare a flare. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake. The creatures are moving underground and start trapping them by covering the exit with dirt. With Rocco barking and the rumbling intensifying, Paul tells his son and Rocco to step back. He places the flare in a hole in the ground, creating a small explosion that sadly injures him as well. Back at the house, Joseph hears strange noises and starts planning. Minutes later, he sits by the main door with a rope tied to his chair, pretending to be asleep. A creature pushes aside the wood covering a hole in the door and extends a long nail to test if Joseph is truly asleep. When Joseph doesn't react, the creature steps inside, only for Joseph to spring his trap by pulling the rope, dropping a cage from the ceiling and capturing the creature. Satisfied, he covers the cage with a blanket and goes to sleep. The next morning, Joseph becomes anxious since the others haven't returned, so he takes the car out to search for them. Meanwhile, Thomas digs through the dirt to reopen the crevice's entrance and drags his injured father out. Rocco follows the sound of Joseph's car and leads him back to his family. The brothers work together to carry Paul to the car and then back to the house, placing him in bed. While they discuss what to do next, Thomas notices the cage and lifts the blanket, causing the creature inside to go wild. Joseph quickly covers it again, explaining that light harms the creatures. The brothers bandage Paul's wounds and Joseph shares his observations from the previous night. The creature took only 8 seconds to get inside, the shortest time yet. He suspects there was a second creature that left. Their behavior seems to be changing rapidly, and Joseph concludes that something isn't right. Thomas suggests that the creatures might be seeking revenge for the ones Paul killed, as Charlotte had said they rarely come near the farm. Joseph believes it was Paul alone who killed the creatures, not both of them. Determined to prove himself, Thomas tries to kill the caged creature, but Joseph intervenes, wanting to study it. During their struggle, the creature escapes and hides under the bed. As it peeks out, Rocco barks, prompting the creature to transform and attack. Joseph pins it down and Thomas finishes it off by decapitating it with an axe. Still curious, Joseph takes the creature's body to the barn to dissect it, but despite his efforts, he gains no new insights. Thomas suggests taking Paul to Charlotte's farm, where they might find better shelter and medicine. Joseph doubts the roses will help, but Thomas insists. The brothers load Paul into the car and drive to the farm, where Charlotte's parents confirm Joseph's fears. They don't have enough medicine to spare and refuse to take in someone so severely injured. Charlotte protests, but her parents ignore her. However, they agree to let Thomas stay, reasoning that it would leave Paul and Joseph with more resources back at their house. Joseph walks away in anger and Thomas follows him. They get into a heated argument where Joseph accuses Thomas of being responsible for their father's impending death. Enraged, Thomas pushes Joseph to the ground and begins choking him, but stops when he realizes what he's doing. Joseph immediately gets in the car with their unconscious father and drives away, leaving Thomas behind to join Charlotte and her family at the farm. Later, Charlotte shares some real food with Thomas and shows him a few of her personal belongings, things Thomas has never seen before. The two share a tender moment and kiss, only to be interrupted by Charlotte's father, who sends her to another room. As Joseph drives back home, he notices the sheep running in terror and mounds of dirt scattered around, signs that the creatures are moving underground. When he arrives at the house, he spots a trail of dirt by the wall, suspecting that the monsters might be beneath the house. After attending to his father, Joseph heads to the barn to gather materials for a new plan, then starts blocking all the windows. While moving through the house, he falls through a carpet into a hole, realizing that the creatures are already inside the building. At the farm, Thomas is caught snooping in the kitchen, searching for medicine to take back for his father. Charlotte, sympathetic, hands him some and he thanks her with a hug, promising to return. Unbeknownst to them, someone is listening. As Thomas heads to the gate, a farm worker stops him with a gun, accusing him of theft. Desperate, Thomas explains that Charlotte gave him the medicine, but the man doesn't believe him. The workers restrain Thomas in the barn, tying him up and playing loud music to mask their intentions. Just as one of them prepares to shoot Thomas, a hole appears under him and he falls, missing his shot. Panic ensues as more creatures emerge, attacking the men. In the main house, Charlotte's parents wake up to strange noises. Her father lights a candle to investigate, only for a creature to break into their room and attack. The candle drops, starting a fire as the creature leaps from the father to the mother, attacking them both. The father manages to pull the creature away, allowing the mother to run in search of Charlotte. Before she gets far, the monster catches her, transforming and vomiting on her before striking. Hearing the commotion, Charlotte leaves her room, horrified to find a trail of blood. She follows it to the bathroom, where she sees the creature with her mother's body. Back at the barn, the workers are desperately trying to fend off the creatures, but are overpowered. Those who escape are pursued as more monsters arrive. Amidst the chaos, the barn catches fire and Thomas breaks free by knocking over the furniture he's tied to, shattering the wood binding his hands. Just then a creature spots him, but before it can attack, Charlotte arrives and shoots it. The two teens escape, and seeing her home in flames, Charlotte tells Thomas that her parents are gone. They decide to head to Thomas's house together. Back at the house, Joseph throws furniture into the hole beneath the floor to buy some time, then checks on his father, gently kissing his forehead before preparing to defend them. Suddenly there's movement at the door, but it's just Thomas and Charlotte. Joseph admits he needs Thomas's help, but their conversation is interrupted by Paul regaining consciousness. After taking the medicine, Paul tells his sons to keep fighting. Joseph shares his plan. They gather all the gas cans from the barn while Rocco barks to warn of approaching danger. They also bring an old freezer inside. Thomas and Charlotte reinforce the windows while Joseph constructs a pile of furniture doused in gasoline, adding every explosive item they could find, topped with one of Paul's cigarettes, which is slowly burning down. As the barricade covering the hole shakes, a creature suddenly comes down the chimney in Paul's room. Another emerges from the hole only to be ambushed by Thomas, who stabs it from behind as it crosses the doorway. The creature immediately retaliates, but Thomas pulls his knife free and drives it into the creature's head, finally killing it. A third monster lunges at Charlotte and she quickly shoots it down. The two of them then rush to rejoin Joseph, and together they try to move the freezer, only for the door to swing open behind them, revealing Paul alive but covered in blood after killing the chimney creature. Grabbing Charlotte's gun, Paul starts firing at the floor to hit creatures moving below. However, the horde is massive and soon it surges into the corridor, charging toward him. Paul kicks the lead creature, causing the floor to shake and collapse, sending most of the monsters plummeting into the room below. A few manage to cling to the edges, but the teens quickly finish them off, saving Paul, who is struck by their teamwork. Together the teens and Rocco hurry to the freezer, but instead of joining them, Paul closes the door behind them, choosing to stay and buy them more time. Inside the freezer, the group huddles while Paul recalls holding his babies years ago, promising they would be safe. A fresh wave of creatures bursts in and Paul distracts them until the pile of gas-soaked furniture finally explodes, igniting the entire house. The blast sends the freezer tumbling, rolling for what seems like minutes before finally coming to a stop. When the teens climb out, they frantically search the wreckage for Paul, but a creature suddenly leaps out of the debris. The group sprints to the car, barely escaping as the flaming monster pursues them. Charlotte's bullets have no effect, so when the creature closes and she slams it with her gun, shattering it into pieces. A few miles down the road, the group pulls over and for the first time looks up at the stars, which they'd never seen clearly due to always hiding indoors at night. The next morning they return to the remains of their home, deciding not to rebuild the same place. After salvaging any usable supplies, they bury their loved ones and say a final goodbye. With the car packed, the three teens and Rocco set off, hopeful to find a new home in the farms down the valley.